Film Review, Movies, Music, Culture, Politics, Society podcast, interviews, movie reviews, and more. Live Sundays at 5:30 p.m. on Facebook at Crazon Dion.
Hey everybody, this is Lunell, the original bad girl of comedy. I'm here at the Link Promenade in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, and you're watching the Film Review.
What's going on, people? Welcome to another great episode. Episode 84 of the Film Review. Movies, music, culture, politics, and society. And do we have a show for you today? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Do we have a show for you today? Listen. First of all, we're talking to the director, writer, producer, actor in Doubting Thomas.
Yes.
He's going to be on with us.
Yeah.
Also, we're going to be talking to Dr. Monique Morris about a film called Push Out, right? And Push Out is about how the phenomenon of black girls being pushed out of education through corporal punishment, right? Well, no, corporal punishment was swatting. Through disciplinary action, which says that they are more criminal, which winds them up in the juvenile system. So we're going to talk about more about that in 1 second, right? So let me bring the phones up and let me see who we have on the line. Good evening. Who do we have on the line?
Hey, this is Will.
Hey, how you doing, Will? Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm really good. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being with us. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, we have the writer, director, and actor of Doubting Thomas, Will McFadden. And he told you that he's feeling good. So let's run down the film a little bit. Okay, so Doubting Thomas, winner of the Audience Award at Dances with Film festivals, Best Screenplay and Best Actor at Golden Door International Film Festival, Best First Feature at Tall Grass Film Festival. What is it about, though? Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas. It has to do with a family is expecting a bundle of joy. Their first child to make the family three. But when the baby comes out, manifest in the phenotype of black, that's when racism rears its ugly head. How am I doing so far, Will?
I'm enjoying it.
Okay, in description of the film. Okay, so let's run through the cast real quick. The cast, again, the lead role played by Will McFadden, Tom. He also wrote it, directed it, and acted as the lead actor again. Sarah Butler as Jen. Jamie Hector as Ron. Melora Waters as Kate. Walters?
Yes.
Okay, that's why I wrote down the wrong thing. Walters as Kate and James Morrison as Bill. Okay, so let's run this down real quick so we can get to the schema of what the storyline is about. Pretty much Sarah Butler's character, Jen, is married to Tom, played by Will McFadden. And Jen's mom is Kate, and her father is Bill, right? And when this unexpected situation happens, all heck breaks loose, and that's when the tension comes out. So the first question that I have for you, Will, is let's go back to some of your background. How did you start in film?
Well, I started as an actor, and I've been an actor, since college. And luckily, I had people around me that challenged me to have something to say and have ideas and participate in the ways you don't always get to do as an actor. As an actor, you're waiting for people to pick you a lot of the time. lot of it's out of your control. And I had been looking for ways to kind of develop some of my own material. And my best friend, Joe Campbell, now lives in Australia. He told me a story that was the seed of Downey Thomas, and we created that story together. He actually co-wrote the story of the screenplay is based on with me, so he is very much a partner as far as creating this piece.
Okay, so he brought this to you, because I had that down that he was co-writer. So he brought this to you, and when you started to research, how common a occurrence is this?
Much more common than you would think, certainly than we thought. And you know, there's lots of different versions of it. You know, you have one sibling in the family that's lighter skinned than another, or you know, you have some trait that seems to skip generation, and then the one that became very well known was there was a set of twins, and one of them was black and one of them was white, and you know that became you know, something passed around on the internet a lot. But it's much more common than you would think. It's still for optically what happens in the film to actually happen is incredibly rare. I mean, it's like genetic miracle level rare, but it certainly can happen. So that was kind of our jumping off point for the story. But Joe's story, if I could just say real quickly, is actually about his father, who was a black man who was killed in police custody by some white cops.
Okay.
And that became the seed of a possible recessive gene that man could have passed on before he was killed, as a possible explanation for their new baby, without trying to give too much away.
Okay. You know, I heard that in the film, and I would think that, you know, just by science, just science-wise, that it would be more like a dormant gene that then activated somehow. Mm-hmm. Not a recessive, because brown hair, brown eyes, brown skin is dominant by biology. Recessive is light skin, fair skin, blue eyes, blonde hair. That's recessive. So it wouldn't be, that would be considered a recessive gene. So it would be more like it was a dormant gene that then came out and represented its dominance. Would you agree with that?
I love that you just corrected me on that, because I learned a little something right there. I think I maybe come across that before, but I think that's absolutely right. And I stand correct. I think that's a much better way to describe it.
Mm-hmm. Because it was in the film, and you know, the film is for the people, because we're getting ready to review it after we finish talking to you. But the film is such a great.
Around for that. I hope you're going to be nice.
Oh yeah. The film, we're going to tell you here right here that the film is such a great film. I want to give a little spoiler on our review. It's such a great film. It keeps you on the edge. The tension of once the Tom character is confronted with this, and the deep-seated, restrained racism that he had, that he thought that he was a liberal thinking person, a progressive thinking person, and then his friendship. Well, we're not going to go into that. We're going that till the review, but we're not going to give any spoilers, because we want people to see this film. Right now, the Jen character alludes to Tom not actually knowing his actual side of his mother's side, right? Right. And so I was noticing because, you know, I was noticing that he really didn't want to confront that side, and for something to be such a miracle and so rare to happen, within the story, did you kind of think of figuring out that maybe he had a black ancestor on his side?
Yeah, I think it's natural, like you said, for both of these new parents who are dumbfounded by what their new child looks like to look back into their own history. I think for my character, you know, as far as he knows, they were both white, both of his parents, and he can't imagine his own mom ever being with a black man. And, you know, he alludes to that. He doesn't go into it very much at all. But it's something that, for him, he's able to dismiss as a possibility. And, you know, it's funny because you said it's dormant, not receptive, but I think receptive is used when they're trying to figure out what it could be. And they're just as ignorant on the science behind it as I was in our conversation right now, thinking back to it and nomenclature, because they're looking for any possible explanation other than she cheated on her husband with the black man.
Well, see, the reason why I'm really interested in this film is because I come from mixed lineage. My mother's mother was black, and my grandfather was white, and they moved up to Ohio to get married to begin a family. And all of the daughters, and they were married. Then they began a family. The three daughters looked like Gina Lola Brigida, Lena Horne, and any other the fair skinned people. One of my uncles looked like Humphrey Bogart, right? And then another. So they were all fair, but then they married. They married what they grew up loving, which was their mother. So they married dark-skinned black people, and thus here I am. So this movie is very interesting because people from mixed lineage often talk about people who pass, and this is what this story is about, where people are passing. So when I was asking you about his lineage, maybe his mother or father were passing, thus the gene lay dormant, thus her gene was dormant because she was the first one who was able to pass within her mother's line, you know, being that her mother was with a black man, and then that brought about the brown skinned child with curly hair, because both genes that were dormant then came to their dominance and manifest in that child. So that's why I was asking, did you, because that was alluded to in the film, did you think to go down that road, or you didn't have enough time in the storyline and you just kept it on the side of the woman?
No, we had enough time. It took so many years to make this movie. We looked at it from so many different angles. It wasn't the time. It was honestly just the fact that we had decided as one of the possibilities being from her side of the family. So it actually, now that I hear you talk about it, it makes a lot more sense that it could be a combination of both. It could be, you know, that led to a human being's skin tone. Could be, you know, both sides could possibly have that, for sure.
Because you know that most people who come from mixed lineage, I don't know if people actually know this or not, so we're putting this out because this is a great discussion, and your film is a great discussion in race and race relations and biology, I would say. Most people who are from mixed lineage can look at children or look at a person and say either someone in their line passed or they're passing. Like you take Michael Jackson's children, a lot of people believe that Michael Jackson's children aren't his, but when you look at them and you look at their eye sockets and their cheekbones and their bone structure on their face, you say that's Michael Jackson's. That's Michael Jackson's children, even though they manifest, you know, as they manifest as white. You might as well say, because white is a made up construct, you know, right? So this film right here.
Well, and to that point, if I can just share with you, because that makes me want to share this with you even more, because we had one screening where, you know, there's a scene where Sarah, her character Jen, has been told about this possibility without giving too much away, and she's looking in the mirror, and she's just looking in the mirror for an extended period of time, and this young lady stood up and she said, you know, after she was looking in the mirror for a minute, I kind of started to see it, as in she could see how she would be black. Right. And, you know, as far as I know, Sarah does not have that in her ethnic background. But it was also fascinating because the young woman standing up saying this was she was a young black woman. And, you know, all of us were reacting to that in a really good-natured way. If it had been an older white male, let's say, and he said, I started to see how she could be black in his features, you know, that might go a totally different way. Because, you know, you're going to be looked at like, you know, what exactly are you seeing? What are you saying about, you know, facial structure? And that can be dicey to get into, but the power of suggestion is real, and it does become obvious very quickly that racism is a social construct. And, you know, I've learned so much from screening the film, even like just talking to you right now. You're schooling me in further about how common this is, and that's been one of the best parts about screening the movie, how much I learned.
So, back to the town character for a second. The loss that he experiences in his mind, does he justify it to rationalize his racism, or as we move forward, because we're kind of left on a cliffhanger there, where he's looking across the street. I'm not going to give it away. Does he justify it and move on? Is there going to be a part 2 where he comes to a realization that I'm not the man that I thought I was, and the biases that I actually have him strung me to the point where I've lost more than I would gain?
Well, I like how you put that, and I think my answer would be that he's about to grow.
Okay.
Through this loss that he's had and this experience that he's had. And, you know, people can watch this film and have very different ideas about how racist, or if it was racist, or, you know, his point of view. Because other people will really seek to defend that character. And it's fascinating to me to watch people bend over backwards to do that. And, you know, without explaining it too much, I think for us in creating this story, the idea was that the racism that comes into play is really the racism that Jamie Hector's character feels every day, just living while black and being profiled and having to deal with this his whole life. And once he attaches something that my character has done to this everyday thing that he has to deal with, that becomes something that's possibly insurmountable in their relationship. And to us, that's the tragedy, that it's not even as much of a personal thing. And I think when Jamie and I talk about it, it's actually more the fact that you're supposed to be my best friend and you thought that I could sleep with your wife.
Oh, you're giving too much away, bro. You're giving too much away. We're trying to hold back.
Just jump in.
Yeah, you're giving a little. You're giving a little. Go ahead.
No, but definitely, this is a great film, and you know it's a great film when it leaves you wanting more. Because when it ended, we were like, no, you know, we want more. What is the rest of the story?
Yeah.
So it's well done.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for saying that. And, you know, I think that was ultimately where we ended up. We wanted to leave more questions than answers because the film's that Joe and I kept seeing about race really made it very easy on the audience. And you knew exactly who the racist people are, and they're bad, and we condemn them, and we feel bad for the victims, and we feel good about ourselves for how far we come. And we were sick of that. We wanted to kind of address what we thought was something that was more subtle and harder to put your finger on. And in many ways, that makes it more powerful.
Yes, it does.
So that's what we were looking at here.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really does that because it's a psychological, not a psychological thriller, but a psychological exploration of one person's mind and how the mind somewhat, how could I say, degrades into another thought process that is not necessarily the correct thought process. As you look back at us, people, you see the Doubting Thomas cover, the poster up, so you can make sure you can look at it. It's available on YouTube. You can pay the minimal fee and actually watch this. Can I say that it's a psychological masterpiece where it's actually delving into the mind, right? And what I really liked about it was how you did the hook at the beginning of the hospital, and then you rewound back and told his experience leading into going to the hospital to first meet his new child, right? And so I thought that was beautiful. I thought that was beautifully done. I thought the editing was excellent. I thought that the cinematography, the angles used, were very well done, and the minimalness of the music. Like there are certain scenes where they usually have music to push through, but you were able to put music at the beginning. It was a little in the middle, but then at the end the music came up. But I noticed, I was telling my wife as we were watching it, I said, there's no music moving through this, and this has you on the edge of your seat, like moving forward.
I love to hear you say that, because that's what we were definitely trying to go for. And when people tell me like they feel like they were a fly on the wall and that they're seeing stuff that they shouldn't be seeing, like it's too private. And that's some of the best feedback for me that I can get. There was a gentleman in Brooklyn. We screened it in Bed-Stuy. And it was an older black gentleman who stood up and he said, maybe one of the coolest things yet about feedback-wise, he said he felt like he was watching the disease of racism, or what Toni Morrison referred to as the infectious disease of racism, infect a population. And he had never been able to just kind of like sit back and watch that transpire. And I just love the way you put that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, this I don't know what you and Joseph Campbell stumbled on writing this piece as two people who would be manifest and phenotype Caucasian, stumbled across and brought what you stumbled across and how you stumbled across it. But it is a beautiful piece of work. It is a film that everyone should see. I think that it's something that can play in high schools, maybe even middle schools, because the middle schoolers, since Instagram and Facebook and all the other places, Twitter and all that, they're more advanced and they see more things. And I think that this is something that could really get a discussion going, possibly in the right direction. So I commend you on that. I'm saying that.
I'm really glad to hear you say that.
Yeah. Right here, people, you see the picture of Will McFadden. We have him up here. And don't forget that after this finishes, after the original play, it goes on iHeartRadio, Spotify,
Yeah.
Google Play,
Yeah.
Apple Podcasts, and more, and you'll be able to see it. And it blasts out all over. We're in parts of Africa being viewed right now. We came off of last week's show, and we are in Spain. Spain is as hot as the United States on the map, on the audience geographic map that we released. So we want to say so we want to say to you that we're going to get this out there because it is well worth seeing. So what is the response to you? Because sometimes people can't separate a character from the actor. So what is the response to you after the film is over when you screen it? Do people run up to you, or do they stand up and say that you're finally getting yours, you're getting your comeuppance? What do they say?
That's a great question. And you know what? It differs. It varies. It varies on the audience. It even sometimes varies on what day you're seeing it on. Like, somebody came to a screening recently and said, this time I really hated you, man. Like, I just thought you were completely full of it. So, I think the thing that people relate to is the moment my character has where he says something and someone close to him decides upon him and his character. He's revealed as, at least in someone else's eyes, as being racist, or less than perfect in that respect, in a way that, people want to have ways to have these kind of conversations, but the price of admission is risking, and not even so much risking, I think pretty much guaranteeing that you're going to have an ignorant moment where you get a chance to learn, and you expose your lack of perfect wokeness, and you have room for improvement.
Okay, here's a question about room for improvement. The Kate character and the Bill character, do you have married couples stand up, or do you have male or female stand up and address what Kate did as far as making her daughter pass by not telling her about her black father?
I do. I definitely do. And I even had one woman recently who came to me days after she saw the movie, and she said, I can't stop thinking about it because my daughter, she came out to me as gay, and she noticed when her daughter came out that she was having responses that she didn't think she'd have because she has gay friends and she's very open-minded and is an advocate. But the thoughts that she was having were really bothersome to herself. And, I told her that what Joe and I learned in writing the script and just using our imagination, a lot of that is love for your child, because you are confronted with the fact that it might be a little bit harder for them in the world. So you might be reluctant to learn that about your child. Or if you have an opportunity for them not to, in that case, be gay, in this case of this story, to pass as white in America, you can hardly blame a mother for wanting that for her child. And it's definitely something people relate to.
Okay, this is good. This is good discussion here. Here it is. We're going to have this discussion now that you brought in homosexuality, the person coming out gay. Can homosexuality really be compared to being black in America? And here's how I preface this. Racism is the fear that one day a certain phenotype will no longer see themselves on the planet because they found out through experiments that the Germans did on the Tasmanians and the experimentation that was happening during slavery in America, that when the white slave master traveled down to the slave quarters and had sex or raped the black slave female, that the baby came out looking more like the slave female, or maybe like the husband of the slave female, right? And so they found out and that is pretty much why racism exists, because when people start talking about let's love one another, then love leads to sexual activity, which leads to an annihilation of a race. So then the race that can be annihilated through sex then turns around and then begins to annihilate the race that can do that to them out of a fear of what Public Enemy used to call a black planet. And really it's of no cause from black people, because black people are not trying to necessarily take over, but have their rightful place in the society. So can homosexuality, understanding that definition of what's happening, can that really be compared to being a black person globally around this earth, when it has to do with phenotype annihilation? I'll just call it that. One group fearing that they will no longer see themselves on the planet. It's kind of like how people, depending on whatever their religious belief is, they have a fear of dying, that they will no longer be on the planet anymore. And that's kind of like what I equate to those who practice racism and white supremacy, that they have a fear of no longer seeing themselves on the planet. So can homosexuality really be compared to something that is more of a mental illness on the part of the people who feel they will no longer be here? Because I don't remember that a person being a homosexual can cause a whole group of people to no longer be on the planet.
Well, I think it's a great question. I think it's not an easy answer.
Okay.
And I think there are certain things that absolutely can be compared, but there's levels to it.
Okay.
And, if you talk about oppression and being disenfranchised and being persecuted, I think both groups have experienced that. But there's certain things that are specific to the black experience that you can't compare. But, when you hear you talk about it, it makes me think of what we had addressed just a little bit earlier, which is the race is something that we've constructed, and that we need to basically F the racism out of the human race. And that is a different way of looking at, this fear that will be taken over by one race, because we started with one race, and it's the human race anyway. And we're doing this to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to hear you say that, wanna why? Because this is where this film, to me, is a jump-off point, right? There are certain tropes in it that we're going to talk about in the review, but I believe that it is a jump-off point that can spark the conversation, and I really believe that people need to see this film, that it needs to go further and drive further. So the next question is, what are your plans to drive this film to be seen? Not only you can tell us where they can see it besides YouTube, where they can see it, the platforms, and driving it into getting picked up and distributed to go through the national theater chains. What are your plans for that?
Well, I'm really glad you asked. I'm trying to figure that out. And, I think for me, what's been great to see, and it's by far the greatest thing about the movie, in all its imperfection, one thing it definitely does do is spark conversation and provide a jumping off point for all kinds of moments already, and revelations and discussions that have been transformative for me. And unforgettable. So, I've definitely been exploring how to do that on a larger scale and pairing with organizations that can sponsor us. We're very early in our distribution stage, and the idea of, watching this movie as entertainment, like while you're cooking a meal or on your phone or whatever, it makes me a little bit sad because I've seen the power it can have when it's experienced in a group and then used as, like you said, perfectly jumping off point. You know, and that's the real home film. So I've had people approach me that are interested in taking it around and using it as a teaching tool in academia, and as a tool, really, in large part for white people who think they're woke already, who consider themselves non-racist, like myself. You know, I had a woman in Brooklyn who said, I want to take this around the country and screen it to white people and use it to teach about how to be anti-racist. And the first thing I want to teach them is that they have implicit bias. And the first step is just owning that, you know? Like, that's part of being a human being. And if you grew up in a racist society, that's going to be part of your experience. And like you said, you're exposed to tropes all the time that ingrain this in you subconsciously as well. So I wish I had a clearer answer on that, but just you asking the question makes me more motivated to pair with an organization or two or three or what have you that can really help us get it out there in that capacity.
Okay, so besides...
my best friend and I, we treated at Occidental College. My roommate from Occidental, he's a community builder. He works in restorative justice. And he facilitated the discussion afterwards. And, you know, he happens to be a black man. And I want to be working, you know, it's not just this kind of thing where, we're trying to teach people. I'm trying to learn myself. It's about creating questions, not answers.
Okay, so besides the national theater chains, where can they watch your film now?
Great question. So if you go to doubtingthomasmovie.com, there's a list of everywhere you can click on the actual direct link. You can see it on Amazon right now. On Amazon, you can see it on iTunes. You can see it on Google Play and Vudu, YouTube Red, lots of different platforms you can rent or buy. And I think we have another 60 days with this window, and then it'll probably be going to other platforms as well, like subscription services. But you can see it right now if you go to doubtingthomasmovie.com, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Doubting Thomas Movie. And the main thing is to use it as a conversation jumping off point, like you said.
And how can they get, for aspiring actors, because I always look out for the aspiring actors, how can they get in contact with you, or how can people get in contact with you to learn about the next feature-length films that you're casting, or short films that you're casting? How can they get in contact with you?
Oh, that's great. Well, let's see. I'm on Instagram, Mr. Will McFadden, Mr. Will McFadden. You can message me there, I suppose. And there's also an email on the website, doubtingthomasmovie.com, that you can send mail there.
Okay. All right. Well, it has.
And I'm on Twitter too, is Mr. Will McFadden.
And also on Facebook.
Yeah. I am back on Facebook, so I'm trying to promote this movie. So yeah, I'm on there too. But I'm trying to get better with the social media. It's difficult to have these very, thanks to you, very intelligent conversations. Like you're creating the space for one right now for us to have in a social media environment. Because a lot of people see the trailer and make a lot of assumptions about the film. And, racism starts to come out real quickly online. And we had a lot of backlash towards the movie. So, that's been disappointing, but not necessarily surprising for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it does motivate me more.
All right. Well, this has been a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for writing the film, for acting in the film, and directing the film, and bringing a conversation piece.
Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, bringing a conversation piece that will move dialogue and start to make people maybe take the swab in their mouth and find out exactly what's happening in this false and fake construct of race, because people are in fear of what is called a so-called quote-unquote black planet. So we'd like to thank you for calling. Again, people, you've been listening to and watching the interview with Will McFadden. He is the director, writer, and acting in Doubting Thomas, and you should see this film, and he's told you that just rewind back after we're totally done, and you can watch it again on all the various points. And so again, Will, thank you for calling in. This has been a beautiful conversation, and we look to speak with you again.
Well, you absolutely made my day. It's really a pleasure to talk to you both, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Okay, you too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, people.
Good.
So now, it's time to review the film. Doubting Thomas, right? All right, so Doubting Thomas, the cast. We just finished interviewing Will McFadden. He plays Tom. Sarah Butler plays Jen. Jamie Hector as Ron. Melora Walters as Kate, and James Morrison as Bill. Right? Now let's run this down so you can understand the character setup. Tom and Jen are married and they're expecting their first child. Ron is the black friend, but not in films. When you have a black friend, they really don't have agency. When they're a black friend of a Caucasian character, they really don't have agency. This character is written to have agency, which is a plus, right? Kate and Bill are married. Kate and Bill appear to be the parents of Jen, right? Who again is married to Tom. So there's a string of situations that happen. You see this in the trailer, so this is not really a spoiler. So there's a string of happenings that actually take place beforehand, right? And what happens is the film opens up and you see Tom concerned, finally getting to the hospital. The story rewinds back, and it tells you what leads up to and introduces you to the main characters in the piece, right? Which are which are Tom, Jen, and Ron, right? And Ron is a doting father himself. He has a son, and he plays catch with his son, but he's like the best friend of Tom, right? But he is a black friend that has agency in the picture, right? So something happens, and we're going to get into that when we get into the tropes of the film. Something happens, and Tom is delayed to getting to the hospital. But when he gets to the hospital, everyone who was ready to welcome the bundle of joy into the world have left the hospital. And the only person that is there is Ron. And then the baby comes in, and the mother holds the baby, and Ron said, and then Tom says, "There must be some kind of mistake." And that's where the picture takes off, people, and it starts to run, and you see Tom begin to grapple with his mental, and then Kate and Bill are introduced as a meeting is held over her house, and uncomfortable truth is exposed, and the story really turns.
Yeah.
And then it really gets into where it's going. But it keeps you on the edge the whole time.
Yeah.
And it starts to, with the secondary characters, the office workers, the Snoopy underling of Tom working in the office, confronting Tom with something that could happen, and then it twists Tom's mind. So Tom's mind is already twisting.
Right.
And then it twists some more. You see this in the trailer. Tom says at one point, I don't want a black kid. Right? You don't know who he's talking to, but you will see. Right. You have to see this film because it brings forth some uncomfortable truths, right? Now, unfortunately, just like last week when we were speaking to Wayne Powers, there are some racist tropes in the film. No matter how well-meaning the film is, there are bigoted tropes in there, right? The recessive gene, we discussed that. Right. The recessive gene, it is actually a dominant gene that is dormant, that for some reason came to its full dominance and then produced the child, right? So that's one thing, and that's spoken through a secondary character, right? And, but those particular characters, when they're talking, they seem, well, you have to watch the film, but they seem racist, right? They're in the suburbs, but there's a robbery that happens, and you would say, well, statistically, people rob where they are, right? So if you're in a predominantly Caucasian suburb, you're not going to have necessarily black people robbing that predominantly black suburb, right? Predominantly white suburb, right? So people rob their own people. So Asian people rob their people, black people rob their people. It's only rare occasions where something like that will happen, and then it's blown out of proportion because, again, people are in fear of a black planet, so they want to say that these people are not worth anything, so we should kill them off, right? So that's in there, and so that's and then here's another one. Here's another one that would never happen. Remember, we talked about this trope last week with Wayne Powers, which is the Caucasian person is going about doing their joy. And somehow a black character comes in to destroy their joy, when in actuality, like an irritant, but in actuality it's often the reverse because of the type of society we're in, but it's projected onto the actions of Caucasians are projected onto a black person, and saying that is no way ever that I have seen where I've seen a lot of white cops hold up and keep and make black people have to sit down for a minute while they go, but I've never seen the reverse. Right? If we see it, they're reprimanded instantly. So it's a impossibility. So that's a trope that's in there that's often in movies that are written by, Caucasian directors, which is that somehow the black person is there and somehow takes away that person's movement or their joy, and that's farthest from the truth, right? When we can look through history and see that most times it's the reverse, right? So they made it the converse when it's actually in reverse. That's how it is in actuality, right? No reverse, but in actuality, and then they make it the converse in film, which is not necessarily right. So those are three bigoted tropes that are in the film, but saying that because of what the film is trying to say and what they're trying to put across in the film and get the discussion going and where this discussion can lead to, it's we can't but give it high marks. Cinematography 10. The edit, showing him arrive late, then rewinding back and telling the story to the point, and then moving forward. That's a 10, right? the acting, the arc
Yes.
of the characters. I want to make sure I get this all in because I have all this written down, right?
Mm-hmm.
The arcing of the characters.
Yeah.
The relationship between Ron and Tom.
Right.
And how it is on one level, then it totally arcs into a different level.
Yeah, because they were like brothers.
Like brothers.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And I mean, it's just a great film. The characters are well done.
Mm-hmm.
The suspicion
Mm-hmm.
that brings about the tension
Yeah.
in the film,
Yeah.
and the loss is well tempered. It's at the right temperature
Yes.
in the film to put it across,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the racism in the character Tom is so subtle,
Right.
and the way that they wrote this
Right.
to what black people have been saying for so many years.
Right.
It's just like the case that they have coming in front of the Supreme Court. Byron Allen sued Comcast, and he won in the appellate court of Ninth Circuit.
Okay.
Now they're moving it to the Comcast took it to the Supreme Court. Supreme
Right.
Court didn't hear what Byron Allen about the Byron Allen part because they knew that was correct.
Right.
They wanted to look at what Byron Allen used, the 1866 Civil Rights Act, Section 1981,
Mm-hmm.
that deals with fair contracting,
Right.
land ownership,
Right.
just being equal to a white citizen
Right.
as a black citizen in the United States of America. And they're
Right.
looking at this and
Right.
on November 13th. And if they come back with a ruling that guts it, it takes black people back to 1865.
Okay.
And so it's what we've always talked about, the subtleness
Right.
of racism. And what it is when people study his story
Right.
of America, in America, you
Right.
find that all they have to do is hold us back 100 years, and then we're on the hamster wheel again trying to
Yeah.
catch up. So this is what this film shows, that once he gets this suspicion,
Yeah.
it's how he handles his friend then, and that's equal to what they're doing with the 1866 Civil Rights Act, right? And trying to gut it, right?
Right.
So I mean, it's very subtle and it's
It
well
is.
put across, and so for that reason, we here at the film review,
You definitely give it a 10.
we give it a 10.
Because like Will said, it's as if you're a fly on the wall.
Mhm.
Like this, like it's actually going on. The acting is well done. It's superb.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you're watching it and you're all in. It's not as if you're watching a film. You're actually watching the lives of real people and what they're experiencing. It's so well done.
And I love seeing Jamie Hector in a role
Yeah,
that wasn't a pimp,
right.
wasn't a drug dealer. It was not,
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with those roles,
Right.
but having script writers
Yeah,
who are not from the black experience
right,
able to write
right,
the black experience
right.
is refreshing,
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
To see and to show this person on a whole nother level, because there's all different levels,
yeah,
right? And so, and that's in life in general,
Yeah.
right? There's all different levels and all different types of people. So
Yeah.
we enjoyed this film,
yeah,
right? And
Well
so
done.
it's a 10.
yeah.
So now, people, let's move right here. Since we talked about the 1866 civil rights case, did you know November 13th, people, the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, is hearing the 1866 Civil Rights Act. Again, Byron Allen
Yes.
sued Comcast because they were basically, they have majority black people buying the product,
Okay.
which is the cable, and they're watching the cable, but they have little to no black-owned stations being sent through the cable lines into people's homes, and that's what he sued for, because they basically told him flat out, no, even though you're so successful, no, we don't need you. So what he describes it as is the difference between targeted black and black owned media. So targeted black media, so that means that you get the pimps and the O's and drug dealers, but you don't get the other side. Right? Which there's always a balance, right? And so that's why Byron Allen went in and sued, and he won, and he went to the appellate court, Ninth Circuit, and won. And so Comcast took it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, oh, the Byron Allen stuff is right, but we're going to use what Byron Allen did. We're going to look at the 1866 Civil Rights Act, Section 1981, that Byron Allen utilized to win in the Ninth Circuit. And we're going to look at it and say that it has to be 100% beyond a reasonable doubt that the people were racist against you. And that's something that is impossible to prove, because the people can say, I was racist against you 99%, but the 1%, the reason why I didn't choose you is I didn't like your shoes. You wore tennis shoes instead of dress shoes to the meeting, so I didn't like that. And 99% of the rest of it is you're black, and so, but it's not 100%. So it's something that's not able to be proven. So Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush, came out with a letter where he's calling for the breakup of Comcast because it's too large, right? And we, a week before, came out with the boycott of Comcast. We're saying it's easy to do, right? This is not an endorsement, but you can get a smart TV with the Roku on it, and you can choose the channels that you want, and you can cut the cable. Right? And this is an easy boycott before November 13th. The sets are very inexpensive these days.
You'll have access to HBO, Showtime, all of them. But
Apple TV. You can download the link,
Netflix,
and you choose the channels you want, and it's cheaper. Right. And the only thing you might keep is if you have internet with Comcast, then you will keep the internet part, but it will cut the bill down to more than half of the bill, and cutting their revenue by half causes them a problem. Thus, they will come to the table and they will drop this. And we're also calling not only for the boycott, but we're also calling for the CEO, COO, and CFO to be X'd without severance package, so that money can go back into doing things and bringing black stations on, and not telling them that they have to sell advertisement to pay you to be on your cable, on your Comcast. They should be paying them to be on Comcast because of the amount of people who watch it who are black, African American, ADOS, foundational black Americans, Afric style beings. Did we get that all out? Yes, we did. So that's what we're calling for, and it's easy to do, and you can see that on my Facebook page. You can also see that on my Instagram. You can see it on my Twitter. You can check out that. Twitter is Crazy D DVD. Crazy D Film Dude is the Instagram. Twitter, or I always said Twitter. Facebook is Crazon Dion, where you're watching us right now, right? And we have perfect streaming. And right now we're also simulcasting right now on YouTube. We have YouTube and Facebook simulcasting at the same time, and we're also on Blog Talk TV. And afterwards, after this original broadcast, we then transfer and go over to iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, right? Who else? Google Play, Spotify, Podcast Addict. Which one?
Oh yeah, podcast.
And what did you say?
No, that's what I said.
Oh yeah, Podcast Addict.
Yeah.
And so you'll see us on all those platforms, and we're also on SoundCloud.
Yeah.
And so we're just doing it up so we're global. And the last map that we put out there showing how we're lighting up, you can see it back there in the back up here, right? You can see it right there. This is the old map. Since then, Spain lit up as blue as America, and that's what's that, Alaska? Yeah, America and Alaska. It's just as blue, dark blue. I mean, they're really listening, because did you know that there are black Spaniards, right? All right, people. So we wanted to tell you that, and that's very important to know. Very important to be involved in, right? Let's see what you are not connected. What happened? Okay. Okay, people. So as we go forward,
Welcome to Blog Talk Radio.
I'm going to have to reconnect. I don't know what happened here. Let me just reconnect real quick, and then we'll move forward with the show. Because so I'm glad that did not happen while we were on the phone with Will, right?
Press 1 to hear important information.
Since it appears falling back into a live show, we're continue now.
All right, people. So now we are back. Oh, and we have our next caller, right on time. How about that? 514. So the next person coming up, people, at right now at 6:30 is a doctor. She has a new movie out. It is a documentary.
Yes.
It is called Push Out.
Yep.
And we're going to bring her up on the line real quick. Good evening. Who do we have on the line? Hello. Are you there? Hello. Hello. I'm not hearing anyone. Okay, we should have someone. I don't know. Let me see. Let's try this again. Caller, are you there? Hello, caller. This is interesting. I have a caller, but I'm not getting. Hello, caller. I'm not getting the person coming in. This is not good. This is not good at all. We have our caller up, but I'm not getting a signal. This is a bummer. Hold time. This is a bummer right here, because our next caller is up, but I'm not hearing anything. I'm going to ask for the caller to call back in. Let me see here. Let me put this in. I'm going to ask for the caller to call back in, because I did not get a good signal on you, and I was not able to, well, while we're waiting, let me tell you about the next film that we're going to review, and hopefully we will have the caller call in. Dr. Monique Morris.
Yes.
Okay, let's try this again. Good evening, caller. Are you there?
Okay.
Hello. Is this Dr. Monique Morris?
This is. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. I don't know what was happening before,
Okay,
but
correct.
this is live. This is live streaming, and anything is possible to happen. But we are happy to have you. All right. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Monique Morris has a documentary called Push Out, the criminalization of black girls in schools, right? It is a audience favorite award at the DTLA Film Festival. Now, the DTLA Film Festival is for films that are from people of color who are not necessarily recognized in Hollywood, in California, in LA, where the mecca of filmmaking is created. Often people of color and their people of color and their films are often ignored, and she is the winner of DT Film Festival Audience Favorite Award. How are you doing this evening, Dr. Morris?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay. So now Push Out is based on two books by Dr. Monique W. Morris, Push Out and Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, the education for liberation of black and brown girls. So the first question that I have for you, because I have your picture up so everyone can see you, so they know who we're talking to. How did you discover that this was happening? How many years back did this phenomenon start to happen? And then when did you begin to develop the language to tackle this, turning it into the programs that we see today?
Yeah, thank you. So I have been in the field of juvenile justice research and education research for a very long time. I think my first exposure to girls who were impacted by criminalization was as early as 1995, when I was in New York and would see that there were girls who were locked up in the juvenile detention facilities, but people weren't really talking about them. I spent years going in and out of detention facilities, talking to girls and boys about their experiences, but over and over, as we started to develop a language and series of opportunities to respond to the conditions of boys and young men in our communities, we were not doing the same for the girls. And for a while, that was driven by this perception that the girls were not impacted as heavily by this condition as the boys. And so we were making this comparison between the girls and the boys without looking at what was happening just among girls. And when we started to look at what was just happening among girls, we saw that black girls were experiencing harm at greater levels than their counterparts of other racial and ethnic groups with respect to school discipline. And it was facilitating their criminalization, their contact with the juvenile court and criminal legal system, their involvement and with this system, and their likelihood of being locked up in their lifetime. And so it was important for me, as a black woman, mother of two black girls, to begin to partner with others who saw this as a crisis and who didn't want to wait for our girls to somehow be discovered, or their conditions to somehow be discovered, but to be in community with them around elevating this as a critical issue in our communities, but also developing responses to this issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I noticed in the writing and watching the film that the term young women was used. And let me preface this by saying that coming up as a boy, people would tell you, like, you're playing sports, oh, you're a young man, toughen up, toughen up. And people hear that in the larger society, and they will use that against the black male. They'll say, okay, he's 13, 14, but he's a man. Is using the term, instead of saying that they are girls, saying that they are young women, they may be in middle school or elementary school, and they say, you're young women, act like young women. Can that be turned, is that being turned against girls, black girls, by us calling them young women?
I think it's part of a conditioning in our consciousness around how we see our girls. I definitely refer to girls as girls and young women as young women. and we encourage people to recognize the ways in which we are, doing what is called adultifying our girls. Okay. Boys and girls in the black community experience adultification in a way that can lead to their dehumanization. And with girls, and what we discuss in the film and in the books, is how this adultification of Black girls really lends to adults seeing them as more adult-like than they actually are, that they are believed to need less comforting, less protection, less nurturing, that adultifying a Black girl can lead to a harsh punishment because there's less patience with them, or this belief that they should be in greater control of their behaviors than they actually are developmentally. And so, calling someone a young lady or a young man can be harmless if there is not this additional subconscious way in which we are reading the behaviors and then engaging in actions when they make mistakes that are harsher than we would, someone who is not a Black girl. What is really important in this is that Black girls experience adultification when they're as young as 5 years old, and it peaks when they're between the ages of 10 and 14. That's something that was discovered by the Georgetown study, the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality study that looked at adultification. And it matters to us because we're looking at girls who are in middle school. We're looking at little girls and seeing a 5-year-old Black girl and a 5-year-old white girl and thinking that the Black girl needs less protection than her white counterpart. And so that racial bias is what we call attention to, that can lead to differential outcomes in school discipline decisions, but also just in terms of how we engage her as a potential scholar. So, ultimately this is about calling attention to all the ways in which we are facilitating harm in the life of Black girls and how we can come together as a community to interrupt those cycles of violence.
Okay. So how much of this, and I'm going to preface this question again, but how much of this has to do with slavery? And this is what I mean by that. Let me set this up. They didn't bring the weakest or the most non-intelligent. They brought the brightest and the strongest. They brought the people who knew how to plant, knew how to build. And how much of this comes from slavery and the powers that be having the knowledge of how, because they brought the strongest and the brightest, of how the development happens, and because they still have the history more than we would know. They have documentation, they have books of slave owners that we don't read that talk about the development of the female, the development of the male, how fast they develop, and how much of what's happening is something that might be ingrained in the larger society's mind because they do have this reference point of the slave master leaving the history behind about how they brought the strongest and the brightest over.
Well, I have not looked specifically at that in this film. I think what is probably more relevant to the discussion here is that early onset puberty is a function of, certainly genetics, but also, some of the social conditions that render Black children vulnerable to forms of violence that can expedite one's development. There is statistically this way in which Black girls are developing or entering puberty is what I want to say, but they're entering puberty earlier than other groups. If you look at Stacey Patton's work, she talks about that being attributed to histories of violence and experience with physical violence that can expedite puberty. There are other conditions of poverty and food and nutritional issues that impact how quickly one's body is developing and how that might occur, throughout history. I do think that the greater impact of the vestiges of slavery and the impact of discrimination really has to do with the absence of there being resources to respond to many of our children when they are experiencing crisis, and the exposure to violence that can render them vulnerable to experiencing what we understand now to be adverse childhood experiences or childhood traumas. And so, the traumas that our young people experience in terms of the incidents that occur in their lives, but also the historical trauma of the institution of slavery itself, and the way that schools might facilitate that or participate in the tapestry of harm when they teach to the oppression or when they fail to acknowledge all the ways in which Black people have been a part of the co-construction of this nation in all ways. I think it's really important, and something that we talk about in the film, the ways in which Black teachers are underrepresented among the teaching workforce, the ways in which our young people are desiring to have educators in their space and an education that includes them in the narrative that they learn, the information and materials that they want to absorb and process as learners. All of this is, I think, tied to the function of education. But it is also important to recognize that, those who were enslaved, the Africans who were enslaved and their descendants have always understood that education is an important factor in the developing narrative of freedom, and that for one to actively be a part of the freedom movement, you had to have a certain baseline of information available to you. It was, central to the development of the Black Panther Party platform. It was central to the work of the Freedmen's Bureau and all the work that went into elevating education as a first step from the institution of slavery. And we can't lose sight of that to be a part of the, to be intellectual, not necessarily to be a professional intellectual, but to be intellectual, to think, to embrace that was part of the statement of engaging in one's humanity. And so what our schools do today should reinforce that, not undermine that. And every time we take young people out of their learning space because of a very subjective behavioral condition and undermine their capacity to learn, we're causing harm. So the invitation from the film is for us to look at the things that are contributing to Black girls being disproportionately overrepresented along this discipline continuum, and to examine what it is that we could be doing differently.
Because I was alarmed with Samaya, for example. I could not believe, the first thing that I would think is when you see a child, during school hours, wandering around in a parking lot, Walmart, and no one, they told her, well, you can't come in the store without a parent, you're too young. But then no one thought to pick up the phone and maybe call the police. We have a child here, we need to contact her parents. I mean, it's just...
At the Walmart,
or basically just, are you okay? Are you safe?
Because clearly something is clearly something is wrong. It's not normal for a child to just wonder. And then the woman, speaking of age, now at the time she was 7, I believe, but the woman told the policeman that she looked like she was 12. So it's just So
that's part of the adultification that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, right.
There was a 7-year-old girl who wandered off, but adults looked at her, perceived her to be older than she was at the time,
right?
And then began to feel like she needed less protection, less nurturing, less comforting. Right. They didn't ask if she was okay. They didn't. Only one person finally said, "Do you need some water?"
Right. Right.
But there was not this urgency that should have accompanied, seeing a young girl out walking over freeways alone in the cold, during a school day. So it's this, sort of persistent narrative about what our girls need and how we should be engaging with them, but also when our young people are having a moment of crisis, to respond to the crisis and not to see them as young people with just a bunch of bad attitudes, or to see girls and start labeling them in ways that can interrupt their development, but to recognize that when young people are experiencing trauma, they need a loving response, not a harsh disciplinary action. And that is, really a shift in how we think about, what our young people need. But it's also consistent with the best practice. So that's, the film itself is based on 2 books. And the second book, Sing a Rhythm, Dance the Blues, really outlines how we begin to shift that narrative so that it's not just about, coming down with the harshest punishment possible as the important response to young people who act out, but really thinking about what is it that is the trauma and disruption in this child's life, and how can we be a part of the tapestry of healing? I say early on in the film that I want schools to be locations for healing so that they can be locations for learning. And in order for us to really do that, we have to be aware of all the ways in which we are facilitating harm and pain, and to reconcile that with, a new set of actions.
Mm-hmm. I have one more question before we get to what the National Black Women's Justice Institute is. But I want to stay on this line of questioning right here. I noticed in the film that they say that the young ladies will have a voice and that they're strong. And let me preface this again. Last week on Facebook and Instagram news, there was a video that was shot from a surveillance camera in a middle school, and the black police officer enters the frame, and he pushes or shoves the young white female into the locker, or maybe punches her, and she falls out frail and weak. Shouldn't we train our girls, because the resistance is there, because we've been taught to resist oppression, and saying that the person should be strong or they should have a voice? When a person has a voice, they usually tell you to shut up. I remember one time we were at the movie theater to see a movie. It was I think it was Friday. It was Ice Cube's movie, but for some reason the cinema that we went to turned the movie down real low, and everyone came out, and I was talking, and I talked to this black police officer. He was older, and he had two deputies beside him, and I was talking to him, and he said, "Shut up, or I will arrest you for disorderly conduct." And all I could do was think twice, act once, and shut up, and then go and write a letter of grievance to submit to the station, because I realized I didn't have a win. When you see things like that, black officer now is relieved of duty, or on desk duty, or relieved of duty, and they're talking about prosecuting him. How much of it is that we need or have to teach our young girls to basically play possum, such as the young white female who was considered frail and weak as she fell down and was like comatose almost? How much of it is we should teach our girls not to resist?
The real issue is we need police out of schools.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we have to, so the issue is that police violence is a form of violence. Mm-hmm. And that to introduce agents of surveillance into schools when they have they are not equipped with the tools that, mostly the girls need to respond to their conditions, period, it doesn't make sense. And so, I have to start with that, because to me that is a fundamental issue, is what we are trying to do when we introduce law enforcement into schools as a persistent and consistent presence in that space, as opposed to the things that we know and the strategies that we know to be more effective to hold young people accountable for behaviors that might be disruptive in a school environment. So I have to start there. Mm-hmm. But I don't think that we should teach our girls to be somehow less resistant to oppression. I think that is countercultural. That many of the issues, that I have observed in my work is that for many black girls, the tools that have facilitated their survival from the violence they experience in their communities, and sometimes, unfortunately, in their homes, as well as the violence that they experience at the hands of the state, are, in many cases, the same thing in their minds. It can be equally disruptive. And so, the strategies for resistance, the ways in which black women have facilitated strength, I don't think to play physically, I don't think that it's a sign of weakness, certainly to experience pain. I also feel like if you are fighting oppression, you can use all the tools that you have to do that. But I will not say that, I think that police in any way should exercise any form of violence, that they just don't belong in schools. And when they engage in behaviors like that officer, then they should be taken and held accountable for that. That is unconscionable to me that we treat young people this way, and that law enforcement engages in the use of force the way that they do, especially with our young people. So that's how I'll respond to that question. Because
Okay.
Black girls will not only be in trouble with law enforcement for how strong they are. I was a strong girl. I'm a strong woman. My girls are strong. The girls I see and work with are strong. And I think that has been a form of a necessary function of their survival. But physical strength and mental, emotional, and socio-emotional strength are also important here. Mental health as a tool of strength is also important. And so there are so many ways in which to interpret one's strength that it's important to invest in all of it, because that is how our society and our cultures have advanced in the face of oppression. And I think that it should be uplifted, not undermined.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So what is the National Black Women's Justice Institute?
The National Black Women's Justice Institute is an organization that I founded that works to conduct research, training, and technical assistance to really try to advance the ways in which we can combat criminalization of Black women, girls, and their families. So we do a lot of work to elevate the importance of combating sexual violence in Black communities, which is a critical first point of entry for many Black women and girls who are involved in the justice system. We do a lot of work around interrupting schools to confinement pathways, which are the policies, practices, conditions, and the way that we think about Black girls that renders them vulnerable to contact with the juvenile court or criminal legal system. And we do a body of work working with formerly incarcerated women to increase their capacity to expand the opportunity landscape for themselves. And so we do a lot of work in this community nationwide with different organizations to support, basically our people being free.
Mm-hmm. So how are Black girls affected by social justice versus social injustice? How do they thrive? How do they develop? Like in between, because social injustice would mean what we've been talking about earlier, how they're seen, how they're viewed, how they're seen as criminal. But social justice, how does that affect them? What steps are in social justice to move Black girls forward into young women and into thriving adults? That's the question.
Well, social justice is, I would say, the broader way that we can understand leading with love, right?
Okay.
One of my favorite quotes is from Martin Luther King when he said that power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. That to me is social justice. It's about elevating the use of power to implement that which will support the public display of love. Black girls, Black women have long been a part of the justice narrative. The question is broad, and I'm sure we could spend like an hour on the ways in which Black girls move forward in that space. But I do think it's important to elevate in this conversation as it relates to the film, the ways in which Black girls have been a part of the freedom narrative and justice narrative in school for a very long time, even though we haven't really engaged them, with a degree of urgency when they experience harm in those spaces. Black girls have been at the center of our conversations about desegregation in schools. Black girls and Black women led many of the efforts to facilitate greater educational equity. Black girls have participated in conversations and in restructuring, much of how we come to understand what is possible in our schools. And Black women were some of the first teachers in those spaces to advance this work and this narrative. And so, in the same way that Black girls are experiencing a disproportionate harm we also know that there's a disproportionate possibility for them to really come in and be, forceful leaders in this space around advancing educational equity. I don't want to go talk to another young person. The reason we did the film was to really try to move people toward a space where we don't have young people who describe their schools as prisons anymore. Mm-hmm. And that when we're talking about what young people need in schools, that we are engaging our girls just as we engage our boys in conversations about what a school needs to be for them and what safety should look like. Mm-hmm. So that's ultimately what this is about. It's about making sure that when we're talking about racial justice, that we are inclusive of our girls, that we understand how they are impacted by these issues, and that we cultivate the leadership that is there and invest in them, not because they might be partnering with a male or give birth to a male someday, but that we invest in them because they are worthy of our investment because of who they are.
Oh, that's beautifully said. For those who are just tuning in, we are speaking with Dr. Monique W. Morris. She has the new documentary out along with the companion book, Push Out. And we wish we had more time with you because I have more questions, but I know the time is short. So we would like to...
Yeah, I can come back another time perhaps and continue a conversation.
Absolutely. What I want to say about the documentary is I believe that everyone needs to see this. Yes. I believe that it will be a help for young women, and really it should be more of a help for the Caucasian female teacher who may have just got a liberal arts degree and decided to get a teacher certificate and teach in inner city schools. I think that that's my opinion. But I thank you for calling in, and we're getting ready to review your film right after we finish talking with you on the phone. So I would like to thank you for calling in and talking and discussing on such a important topic, because the nation is only as strong as its women. And if they browbeat our women, then we're in trouble. So we would like to thank you again, Dr. Monique W. Morris, for calling in, and we're getting ready to review your film.
Okay, thank you so much. Also, I want to share with your listeners that we have the website pushoutfilm.com for folks to get involved in this work and to recognize it's not just a film that stands on its own, but there's a movement behind this work.
Okay. And then they can get in contact with you on that website. Give the website one more time.
It's pushoutfilm.com.
Pushoutfilms.com. Thank you, and we will speak again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.
You too. All right, people. So that was Dr. Monique W. Morris. She has the Push Out book with the companion DVD, and you can see that film. You can go right to the website and see the film. The film also incorporates Sing a Rhythm, Dance a Blues, the education for liberation of black and brown girls. So what I would like to say about the film first is, we talked about it here on the program, but I believe that, take the Samaya character for instance. My mother often tells a story about when she was in elementary school. She would tell the story. And she said that something happened in the class, and the teacher, a white male teacher, had her follow him around all throughout the day. Back then, you could leave school and go home for lunch. So she went home from lunch, told my grandmother, her mother, what had happened. Her grandmother took her in tow and headed back to the school, confronted the white male teacher, and told him, if you have my daughter follow you around the school ever again, I will come up here and beat your Laws were different then. Laws have changed, and they make it for the criminal, right? But my grandmother didn't play as my mother's mother, and my mother did not play. If I came home
Right.
and I told her
Right.
that someone had done something, she was there and she took my word for it. Now, I understand that people try to put their children in schools that they feel they can get the best education. But we have to remember that desegregation and integration did not change the hearts of people. Right? And nowadays, people are not ashamed of Martin Luther King having been assassinated, in my opinion, what I'm looking at, right? They're not ashamed of that, so that pity party is now over, and these people are reverting back because they're seeing, and they're saying what we have lost. So if I'm a parent, and I knew my kid was getting straight A's in another school, and I put her in this school thinking I want to give her a better education, I'm believing my child.
Because we see now all over social media that our children, they're dealing with racist teachers. So we wouldn't expect that because you're sending your child to school to get an education.
You expect that's what you're doing.
But if it wasn't for social media, we would not see, the discrimination that they are dealing with when they're dealing with their teachers. And for this little girl to deal with because she went to her parents.
She went to her.
And told them how she was being treated by her teacher, and she felt that no one was listening to her. And that's why my heart really, really went out to her.
Samaya.
Because if your parents aren't listening to you, and then you go to school and you're being basically mentally abused by this person that's supposed to be your teacher, where do you go?
And we just saw that on a program that we were watching.
Yeah.
What's the name of the show?
Top Boy.
Top Boy.
Yeah, on Netflix.
It's executive produced by Drake.
Yes.
It happens in between Jamaica and England.
Yeah.
Right? And the young boy is in a prep school.
Right.
And unfortunately, the parents have passed on, and the older brother has control of the middle brother and the smaller brother, and he's keeping the household together, right? So he goes to parent-teacher conference. Now, the boy throughout the show, throughout the earlier episodes,
the younger brother,
the youngest brother who goes to the prep school, he's telling his brother, listen to me because he's writing sarcastic comments on my papers, right? So he sits down. Now the brother doesn't know that the older brother is listening, but he's listening to everything he's told him. So when he sat down
at the parent-teacher
conference with the teacher said, well, and he puts on his glasses, and if he was an American Caucasian, he would be a redneck because his skin was red, his neck was red. And he was like, well, how do you think you're doing? He said, the younger brother said, I don't know. And he said, well, I can tell you, you're not doing well. And then the older brother says, well, that's funny because all of the other teachers are giving him high marks. So that would mean that it doesn't have to do with him. It has to do with you. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what we need to do is reevaluate those scores, because no one likes a sarcastic person. Now, do they? You hear what I'm saying?
And the teacher changed.
You get it?
His whole demeanor changed.
And his whole demeanor changed. He said, well, maybe we will reevaluate. That's what you want. You want to be an advocate because you cannot forget, like what we talked about earlier, which the film, I guess, because it has to stay light but be informative to help young children. But what's left out of the film, in my opinion, is the discussion of white supremacy and racism. That these teachers, like I'm watching, because I shoot film, so I see through the 16:9, so I see facial expressions, and I noticed that the Stephanie L. Patterson, she's the principal of Columbus City Prep School for Girls, and she's talking to the two Caucasian teachers.
Who was three,
females.
actually. The black lady.
Well, I'm talking about the two Caucasians. So that's what I'm focused on, because the black lady gets it because of culture. That's what this whole thing, the Vivian Anderson and Venus Evans winners, they both talked about the culture and how you treat kids because you don't have the cultural understanding of it, right? So I looked at those faces and they were so in agreement, but I'm thinking, you cannot change people's hearts. You cannot change where they come from. If they go back home to a not a gated community, but an all-white community that's been re-gentrified, meaning that they didn't want black people there. They wanted to re-gentrify them out. And they go there and live there, then they're part of the problem. And if she happens to be replaced, they could say that they're using the program, but it would revert back because it's about the heart of the woman or the heart of the man.
That's why when I said earlier, like what I really love about this documentary is it should be a part of every educational program. Like every teacher should have to watch this when they're dealing with children of a different culture, because it is a great educational tool.
Yeah, because they have
it
to
is
be
a great educational tool.
They have to be re-educated.
They do.
They have to be reprogrammed.
Right.
Because we know what racism and white supremacy is about. It's in fear of a black planet because they found out, like what we were talking about. This whole episode is about this, and it's beautiful because the next movie that comes up is a great movie too. But what I have to say about this film is it should be in the curriculum.
It should.
But like when the girls talk about how she was pulled out of class, and they allude to the fact that these are white teachers that are strip searching, that are messing with the girls because of their hair, messing with them because they feel that they're insubordinate because they choose to have a voice. And so they have to be reprogrammed from their defective programming that they can't see people as human. I have many stories. I don't. Looking and going through elementary school and all that, I don't believe that there should be a white male or female teacher until black children get into middle school, upper middle school, right? Because 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th are together now, I believe, and then 8th has moved up to the high school, or however they have it now. But I don't believe that they should see white teachers until they get into the upper levels of middle school, because the foundation, because the nurturing that you have with black teachers, I know that most of the problems that I suffered through was when I had a Caucasian teacher, right? I talked about going to music class and they were doing the Star Spangled Banner, and I did that, and she threw me out of class for no reason, and then another student left out of solidarity. He was thinking, he was conscious, right? But that's another story for another time. But the main point is, I don't believe that the Caucasian teacher who, in my opinion, played around in college and then just got some kind of easy degree and then got a teaching certificate to teach schools. And why would you want to come to black schools to teach if you're not, ready? So they should be in upper, and then after that, the kid has his self-esteem and say, there's something wrong with this teacher. And then the parent or the guardian, like the man in the movie, Top Boy, came and said, it's something with you, because the other teachers say that he's jamming out on his grades. So what we want to say is Push Out is a 10. It should be in the school systems. It should be there.
Part of the curriculum and mandatory for every teacher.
And I have a overstanding and an understanding why they did not include that it is white supremacy, racism that not only the black girls are contending with, but the black boys also.
But you know what, now that I think about it, we spoke about teachers. Now that they're putting, they are putting law enforcement in these schools, in which they shouldn't, but the law enforcement should have some type of education behind them too, as far as dealing with children, black girls. I remember, and so they need to see this documentary too. It should be mandatory. I don't think you should just take a police officer and throw them in the school and expect them to it's just so many layers.
I mean, I was in a cocoon until I
Right.
went to Trinity High School.
Right.
But graduating from Trinity High School and seeing
Right.
the quietness of the classes, right, versus what was happening in the black school, but the teachers were nurturing to you.
Right.
They're different.
Yeah.
But I remember being a store owner and a DJ and going
Right.
into John F. Kennedy and seeing the police presence there and
Right.
seeing how it was like martial law.
Right. You know,
It was strange. The cops were yelling at the
see,
kids.
that's what, they're not going to be, nurturing to the kids, in which they should, but
Black cops now.
right, right, period. So they shouldn't have law enforcement in these schools.
Right.
But if they do have their presence in the school, they should have to go through some type of education. As, like they need to see this documentary as well. It should be mandatory for them as well. If they want to put them in schools, they should go through some type of program and learn how to deal with the youth.
That's it. All right, people. So now we come to the review of the night. Ed Norton's
Motherless Brooklyn.
Motherless Brooklyn, right? Motherless Brooklyn. Now, the cast, we have Edward Norton
Yes.
as Lionel Esrog, right?
Yeah.
He is a person who suffers from Tourette's, right?
Yes.
Then we have Gugu Mbatha Raw.
Yes.
She plays Laura Rose,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Then we have Bruce Willis. He plays Frank Minna. William Dafoe portrays Paul Randolph, and
Right.
Alec Baldwin portrays Moses Randolph,
Yes.
right?
Oh, and Leslie Mann, she portrays Julia Minna.
Mm-hmm. And who else? Let's go through the
Ethan
secondary cast.
Supley.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned Alec Baldwin.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Michael K. Williams. Did you mention him?
No, I didn't.
Bobby Cannavale, Cherry Jones, Dallas Roberts, and Fisher Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Wisdom is also in the film. Great cast.
Yes, it is a great
Great
cast.
cast.
So
Great cast.
the movie opens up. It's first of all, let me say that the cinematography on it,
It's beautiful.
the
Beautiful.
through line on it is
Yeah.
beautiful. So the film opens up and it establishes a neighborhood in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It is a neighborhood that is being regentrified. Now, most great films
Right.
that are entertaining also have a social message.
Right.
And this film right here, written by Edward Norton,
And directed by
by
produced
him,
by-
and also acted in
Yeah.
as the main character.
Yes.
He tells this story to you, and it is a piece that has to do with it's a message that has to do with what's happening today,
Yeah.
that's coming from the past, right? So Lionel, played by Edward Norton, suffers from Tourette's syndrome.
Yes.
He is an unlikely private dick who is out to solve the murder of his mentor,
Yeah.
Frank Minna, portrayed by Bruce Willis.
Yes.
Along with Lionel's additional friends, right? The movie takes place, and why? You've seen this in the trailer, so this is not a spoiler,
Right.
but we are going to give you some spoilers here. Minna relies on Lionel because he has a memory. You can
Great
tell
memory.
him something,
Yeah.
and he will be able to spit it right back to you.
Yeah.
So he relies on him. He is actually the leader of the crew, actually, but the rest of the people don't necessarily believe that. But that's in the storyline. That's the minutia.
Yeah.
The movie opens in Brooklyn, and it pulls down, and you see about 7 or 8 black kids playing with a makeshift ball. It looks like a football, and they're playing in the street.
Yeah.
And Minna is meeting with some men, right, about something that he is investigating for them.
Right.
And it goes sour, and it goes through traveling from Brooklyn to Queens, and that's when the story opens up and it really begins, right? What I like about this film is the characters, all the characters. This is a multicultural film. It's not a diverse film. Yeah, it is a multicultural film where...
And it mirrors the country.
And the black characters are fully drawn. Yeah. Right? They are not, they have dignity within the areas that they are. Like all the characters have dignity.
No stereotypes.
There's no stereotypes. There's no buffoonery. There's none of that. This is a well-written film.
Well acted.
Well acted. Yeah. And it has to do, again, with interracial relationships and race. And it also has to do with how I believe that Ed Norton is trying to put across. So this is how I got from the film. Calling a person that is in power a racist may be good for the movement that you are doing, but that person is neither affected or fazed by you calling them racist or clowning them or anything. Because this happens in this film to Alec Baldwin's character, Moses Randolph, right? But Moses Randolph, in a dialogue piece, along with Lionel, talks about the mentality of a person who has power.
Yes, that was a great conversation between him and
And the person who has power, they are going to move anything and everything out the way that they feel that is not on their level. Right? So calling them racist, that doesn't affect them none, because what they feel they're doing is doing something to preserve and leave a legacy for the future. And this is where he is bringing forth this conversation about what's going on with this election. The Baldwin character of Moses Randolph is so much like 45 Donald Trump, and you have to go see this film because Edward Norton is giving some secrets on how what you would call the white supremacist, how the white supremacist thinks, because he thinks as a man of power or a woman of power, and what they feel they're doing is neither racist, but it's just moving people around like chess pieces, like pawns, moving them out the way, and getting them off the board to preserve the future and to leave legacy through building something.
Yeah, this film has so many different twists and turns. It's well written. The music is beautifully placed throughout the film.
It is.
Superb. Well written. I mean, it was just... I would go see this movie again. I definitely will go see it again. It's worth it. This is just this movie, I can tell it's going to be a classic.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Well written, the dialogue, like you said, the conversation with Lionel and
Moses Randolph.
And Moses Randolph was powerful.
Right.
As well as the different conversations, with just amazing film. You definitely have to go and see it. You have to go and see it.
But it's a detective unraveling the mystery. It's a private detective story. I love those stories, except for he makes it highbrow.
Yeah.
He includes POV.
Yes.
That's excellent, and he provides POV of written documents. He makes it a thinking man's, because most detective stories are thinking man's stories, but they don't add in the documents and text that move along to tell this story.
Right.
And we're leaving the best part of the story out, and we're not going to tell it.
Because you have to go and see
this
it.
movie.
The jazz in this film is amazing.
Let's see. Music by Daniel Pemberton, 10.
Yes.
Cinematography, Dick Pope, 10. Editor, Joe Klutz, 10.
Yes.
Costume design, Amy Roof, 10.
Yes.
Production design, Beth Mickle, 10.
Yes.
Script, Edward Norton, 10. Acting, various actors, 10.
Yeah.
Through line of the story,
Yeah.
what the story is about,
Yeah.
and the twist in the story.
Oh my God.
You will not see this twist
And
coming.
multiple storylines.
Multiple
going on,
storylines. 10.
in which they all gel well together.
Story beats.
Yes. Deals with gentrification also.
That's right. And it deals with what's happening
Yes.
today. And it's what happened yesterday happens
Yeah.
today. There's nothing new. And the thought process of the person in power, you
Yes.
have to go see this and you will understand and get some clues on how to discuss what Trump is doing.
Yeah.
None of that phases him because a person in power will believe that they can do everything that Trump said that he did in the past and what he said he's doing now. A person in power believes that.
You know what I just realized, and for those who watched Boardwalk, which was a great film, a great show on HBO, right? Bobby Cannavale, who played Tony, as well as Michael K. Williams, who played the trumpet man, are both from Boardwalk.
That's right.
So, and it was nice when we saw Michael K. Williams on the screen. We didn't even know he was going to be in the film. So that was a nice surprise. Mm-hmm. And his character is major in this film.
His character is major.
Major.
Right? And there is no... It's dealing with white and black.
Yes.
Much like the film that we reviewed earlier, Doubting Thomas.
Right.
But there is no white savior in this film.
Right.
Matter of fact, well, I can't say that. You have to see the film. You have to see this film. It is action-packed from the first opening.
And Brooklyn as the backdrop is just beautiful.
That's right. And showing you the regentrification and people still living in their homes and how the people cheated them from out their homes. All of it's there, people. And it's a history from the past that's relevant to the present. Right. And that's what good cinema does. It is a metaphor. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So we want to say that. So this has been a robust show of the film review, right?
Yes.
A robust show of the film review. We would like to thank all of our guest call-ins today. We'd like to thank Dr. Monique W. Morris.
Yes.
We'd like to thank Will McFadden.
Yes.
And make sure that you see the films that we have highlighted tonight. Yes. Motherless Brooklyn, Push Out, and Doubting Thomas, right? And make sure that you get aligned in and know what's going on with Comcast and trying to take black people's rights away. Right. 1866 Civil Rights Act.
Which really affects everyone.
That's right. Section 18 and 1981, right? What people don't realize is if you don't fight for black people's civil rights, that's what everything else is based on. Because we're the ones who get out there and fight for everybody else, you know, thinking that everything was right.
For all minorities and for the
usually we do. But you know, there's a book by Martin Luther King.
All of the communities.
That Cornell, Yvette Cornell reviewed on one of her shows off of Breaking Brown, where Martin Luther King lays all of this out about who should be, and we shouldn't move until we have true allies. It's already written. Martin Luther King knew that. That was his last book before he was assassinated, and he wrote that in the book. And people who just believe in I have a dream and love, love brings about the destruction. Some people think, those who are in fear of a black planet, that they won't be there anymore.
The book is called Where Do We Go From Here?
Where do we go from here?
Chaos or Community.
Chaos or Community. Pick that book up and read it if you are truly a Martin Luther King enthusiast or a person from the Martin Luther King cloth. You should know what Martin Luther King was saying. He had already dissected all of what we're going through right now before it happened. All right, people. So we have just a little bit left, but we want to say this has been another robust episode of the Film Review. Movies, music, culture, politics, and society. We are the husband and wife team. I'm Crazy D.
Tracy.
And I am the voice of the filmmaker, and my wife is the voice of the critic. And again, this has been the Film Review. Movies, music, culture, politics, and society. And we will see you next time on the Film Review.
Film
Review.
Music, culture, politics, society podcast, interviews, movie reviews, and more. Live Sundays at 5:30 p.m. on Facebook at Crazon Dion.
Hey everybody, this is Lunell, the original bad girl of comedy. I'm here at the Link Promenade in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, and you're watching the Film Review.